Okay, well, welcome aboard. Hopefully I'm not too loud. I tend to have a booming voice, so if I'm too loud, just wave at the guy in the back and they'll find a way to turn me off. My name's Bob McQuaid. I'm with the Graduate School of Business, the Graziadio School of Business, and my co-presenter is Spring Cooke with the Graduate School of Education and Psychology. So we're going to entertain you for the next 45 minutes with our trials and tribulations, and we've inappropriately named it Identifying Effective Teaching Practices, right? And part of the reason that that we've been put together is because we come from somewhat disparate backgrounds, right? I'm a quantitative methods professor, which is just disparate in and of itself, and the Spring comes from the EDD side of the fence with an understanding of how people actually learn. Nobody ever taught me how anybody learned. They taught me how to do things and then said, now go teach other people how to do things. So that's kind of the combination that you're going to see here. So basically, I'm a marginally early adopter. If there's a way to fail with technology, I have found it successfully. And so Jerry Flynn has known me since I arrived at Pepperdine in 1998. He was in my first class. He was a marginal quantitative methods person. Luckily, he's improved drastically since then. And so what we're going to try to do is give you a little bit, for me, I'm going to spend just a few minutes telling you, hey, here's what I've done over the last 15 years. Here's some of the things I've tried. And here's kind of my experience that I've had. And then Spring's going to come in and talk about why some of those things were successful, why some of them maybe could have been more successful. And then I'm going to come back and try to give you a sense of what I think I'm going to be doing over the next couple of years to try to improve on my experience. So I want to preface all of my commentary with the following statement. When I decided to get a PhD and go into teaching, email was in its infancy. A cell phone was about £1.50, right? Some of you, by the way, I can see were before that time even, right? But the concept of office hours meant that you only actually had to interact with students about 2 hours a week if you wanted to on a one-on-one basis, right? And if they didn't show up at your office hours, that was kind of the extent of the interaction, right? That was their job. And so, you know, part of my experience has been over kind of this transition to using technology in the classroom. So I teach two classes. One I teach is a quantitative methods class to executive MBA students. Picture arriving at the facility at 2:30 on Friday, spending the next 8 hours with a laptop in front of you working in Excel, going to bed, waking up the next morning at 8:30 in the morning, or you probably wake up earlier, because you have to be in front of that laptop again at 8:30 and do 8 more hours of quantitative methods. That's the design of the curriculum, 16 hours of quantitative methods in a weekend. Then we leave them for 3 weeks, and we see them again 3 weeks later for 16 hours. So you can imagine how the learning model has shifted as opposed to seeing them, say, 3 times a week for an hour, or 2 times a week for an hour and 15 minutes, or even one night a week for 4 hours. Now, the experience I've had in that class is the following. 20 people, all with different versions of Excel, all with different versions of Windows, all with different computers. Some access the internet successfully, some can't. When they look down and they're working and then they look up and they see something completely different on the screen because they look down at the wrong time, I then have to experience running around the classroom to fix everything. So on the one hand, it's a terrific teaching tool. On the other hand, it's the bane of my existence. Shift gears. I teach information systems in our fully employed MBA program. I teach weekend classes, which are Saturday classes in the fall. I require them to have their laptops open in front of them. So what do you think I'm competing with every Saturday from 8 to 5, and I'm just not that good. I try to tell them, you just spent $5,000 to be here. They say, you need to be better than the football game that I'm watching, right? So I'm competing with all these other spaces. I've gotten emails from students on a Saturday night. They call me on Sunday to see if I've gotten the email. Not even Sunday night, but Sunday morning, just in case I wasn't logged into my email account at 10:30 when they emailed me, right? I will tell you that I don't consider email a wonderful application. I remember a time when I used to leave work, and I actually left work. It was kind of nice. I might go play softball, might go golfing, might go play with family. What do you do now? go home, and boy, if you don't check in and some student has gone over the cliff, you need to be there, right? So technology has truly ruined my life. So everything I say, I want you to package in that space of how miserable I am currently, and I've got like 20 years left. I can't imagine how miserable I'm going to be in 20 years. Okay? So I started teaching right around this time frame. I was at TCU in 95, 96, and 97. I came out here in 98, and I want you to think about that time frame. There wasn't a whole lot, right? I mean, it was basically, we didn't have really laptops in the classroom. In fact, I had a statement in my syllabus that actually said it would be very beneficial, almost critical, for you to have an email address. Right? How many of you would put that in there now? People would think you're crazy. In fact, it's almost critical to have 5 email addresses now, and you better check them all. So it's changed, right? That was PC-based, kind of slow connections. I actually invented a server called horse.pepperdine.edu. My wife's a horse trainer. I thought it was a convenient thing. Most of the IT guys have been around a while, remember horse, because it was always the one that was getting attacked. Whenever there was an attack into the system, they always called me and said, Bob, your server's, doing something wrong. It's like, I don't know what it's doing. I just turn it on and off, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I thought it was a genius in using it, and of course it failed me most of the time, but hey, it was a try, right? All right, so really kind of online learning started coming into vogue right around late 90s, early 2000s, because we started to get higher speed access. You couldn't expect a student on dial-up to connect to Blackboard very effectively even, right? So everything was kind of clunky, a little slow. At the time, we spent a ton of money in the business school on Graziadio net, and it was terrific. I could name vendors, which I don't even know if they exist anymore, Documentum, Peachtree, I think, some others. They created this wonderful interface for us to exchange files with. So I went paperless. I don't collect papers anymore. When I collect a paper from a student, it's submitted electronically. I open it in Word. I use the review function. I give it back to them. And now if I really want to give them lots of commentary, I use my Dragon Naturally Speaking, because typing comments is painfully slow for me. But speaking comments, I'll give them lots of sentences, right? And they like that, lots of feedback. Because if you give them lots of feedback, then you can give them a B. If you don't give lots of stuff, if they just write a really bad paper and you say this is horrific, and you give them a B, then you still have to explain why, right? So I've kind of started using paperless even back then. But what I've started doing since we started using Graziadio net and then Blackboard and now Sakai, I don't let students email me any files. How many of you successfully do that? No files. Not too many, right? If you want your teaching evaluations to go down a full point instantaneously, tell them not to send you files via email, because what's going to happen when they log into Sakai one night, or courses, excuse me? What happens? It's not online, or, by the way, oftentimes it is online. They're just not online, or they're not getting access, right? So you get all these problems. This was kind of common in this time frame, the early 2000s, right? Getting faster connections, kind of shifting more to an opportunity to work online as opposed to offline. But then it started to get even more interesting. YouTube came around in 2005. How many of you use YouTube videos in your classes? See, suddenly very different, right? Half a dozen of us don't let them email us files, but 80% of us find a way to use a YouTube video in our classes. And yet it's only been around since 2005, so roughly 5-6 years. How many of you use Google Docs in your classrooms? Okay, not as many, right? Why not? Is it because of you or because of the student? Do your students know how to use Google Docs? Don't bet the ranch on that, right? And you're going to see later on when I talk about this, I've tried these technologies. I've gotten all excited. I've said, I'm going to use this. This is going to be great. And guess what happens? The first student calls. I couldn't access the file. Did you sign up? Oh, I didn't know I had to sign up. Did you read the email or the syllabus that I sent? I should have done that. Could you send it to me again? Again, do you want your things to go down a full point? Respond like I do. No, check your email, read the syllabus, and go do what you're told to do. Okay, so the concept that, and we're going to get into this, the concept that this stuff is easy to implement Not always the case. Okay? So I actually have started playing with, of course, StudyNet is how we deliver cases. That works pretty effectively. I've started playing with Second Life. Anybody familiar with Second Life? It's an online 3D. I don't recommend you go there unless you've got several hours to get lost and get accosted by people wanting to do things to you that you don't want to have done. But I was told that all of our students were using like war games and these three-dimensional gaming, and I watched my 11-year-old daughter do all the stuff on the various technologies that she has access to, and I thought, boy, what a great idea. Well, it turns out I teach graduate students, and they don't know anything about this stuff. They can't function in that space. Okay? But what you'll notice is different in this time frame is it's become web-based. Right? So we went from PC to kind of what I call internet or network-based to web-based, where the actual functionality is in the browser. And if you believe the hype from Chrome and some of the other Android vendors and things like that, then pretty soon we're not going to need hard drives in our laptops anymore. Everything's going to be browser-based. We're not going to have applications on our system. You're not going to download software and use it. You're going to click an icon, it's going to go out on the web, and you're going to be able to edit out on the web. All your stuff's going to be out on the web. So what I'm using now, kind of the basics. Sakai, of course we call courses. I've started using Skype a lot because I can control Skype. When I log in, it puts up a little icon. If I want that icon to say busy, I can click on it. Then they don't call, well, that's an exaggeration. Then the ones who don't want me to be mad at them don't call me, right? But the fact is I can control that as opposed to sitting in my office and that stupid little thing beeps up and says you have an email. No matter what I'm working on, guess what happens? I have to fix that email, or my phone rings. So I can control my environment a little better with Skype. Some other stuff that I'm using, or I'll go back. Producer was something I used in the PowerPoint 2007, obviously, as recently, but it's been around since early 2000. It allowed me to videotape my full-time class, take their slides, combine the two, put it out on the web, but it was a massive file to do this, so I had to have a server, of course, to do this. And then my full-time students, when I gave them feedback and said, look how bad a presenter you are, they could watch. And they were actually more critical of themselves than I was. Right? They saw that they would stand and read a slide to you like this. But if you just tell them that the day after they've given a presentation, they say, what do you mean? My mother says I'm a great presenter. Right? I write wonderful letters. So I started with Producer. Now there's an online version of this called Zentation. And I would video the students, and I'd take their slides, and I would go back, and it'd take me about 2 hours, and I would create the same online situation, and I'd provide it to them and give them feedback, right? But it took me 2 to 3 hours for each team, I might add, to kind of edit the video and make it work the right way and get it in the right format and the right structure and all that kind of stuff. So recently, this semester, so the jury's still out, I've shifted all that to them. Instead of doing a presentation in my class, taking up my class time, they're on Teams videoing themselves, making up slides, and they're going to create the Zentation package, and we're going to do an online class of presentations. My opinion, jury's out, is that they will be severely challenged because not of the technology. There's going to be one person on each team that just loves this stuff, and they're going to figure it all out, and they're going to do it. But because when they actually know that they're getting videoed for 4 to 5 minutes, and then they watch that video, right? How many of you know where I'm from because of the way I speak? Right? When I speak, I don't hear that. But what do you think I hear when I watch a video of me speaking? I think, oh man, I sound like all those people from Pittsburgh who say "Yuns guys," right? Okay, so I hate watching myself on video. I'll never watch this video that I'll send it to my dad and say, hey, watch me on video, but I'll never watch it, right? They're going to make better presentations. I guarantee it. That's my thinking. What about, will they learn more? Will they do more? Will they function differently? I don't know. We're going to experiment and find out. That's one of the things, the goals here. But I'll tell you what's changed is I've shifted the responsibility from 2 hours per team for me to some number of hours per team for them. and hopefully increase the learning. Now, I don't Facebook, I don't tweet, and I don't give my students my home or cell phone number. I made the mistake once of giving my home number to my students, and my wife told me that that was the last time I would make that mistake, right? We were getting calls all weekend, you know, can Bob help me? It's Saturday at 7. Do you have no, you know, boundaries or anything? So I learned I have to have boundaries. Facebook, tweeting, are those educational technologies? We'll talk about that more as we get through this. They're not for me. They're not for my class. Maybe some of you are very effectively using it. So here's my scale for why do I pick these things out, okay? You'll notice that I have one spectrum says high or low cost to me, and I'm not talking dollars, I'm talking time, because I do other things besides teach. I suspect you do as well. And low to high student value. Now, we can define that in any number of ways. One way might be convenience, right? Maybe it's convenient to the student. That's one way to define it. Another way might be actually knowledge acquisition. Are they able to learn more? Right? But guess what? This scale doesn't change. Time. All right? So what I try to do, and the example I just gave with regard to going from producer to zentation with me doing it to zentation with them doing it, is I believe that I was doing something that was high cost to me but really valuable to them. So I had assessed that and decided it was worth my time. But what I've tried to do is shift it over from high value and high cost to me to the other side where it's low cost to me but still that same level of value to the student. We'll get convenience out of it because they'll do a good job with the presentations and students can watch it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. They have to submit test questions which I then use on the tests. Okay, so the goal here is to think for me is to think in terms of, you know, on the lower side, low cost to me, right? One example is Skype. I use Skype with my executive classes. I don't let them send me an email file, but if they want to call me on Skype, share the application and show me what they're doing, I can explain it to them in 2 or 3 minutes because it's a spreadsheet, as opposed to when they send me a spreadsheet that is just a pile of stuff and say, what am I doing wrong? Well, first you got out of bed this morning, right? And then you opened Excel and it went downhill from there, okay? That's some of the challenge you get into, right? What I found is it's actually high value but very low cost to me. Because if I have to open up that spreadsheet and figure out what they're thinking, I'm wasting time. Versus if they call me and they're talking right to me, then what can I do? I can address it immediately. I can see where they're at learning-wise. I can actually mine what's wrong. Much more valuable. Most of the students love it. Always a percentage that send me a file and say, Dear Bob, I know you told me not to do this. Which I always tell them, if you have to start an email with that phrase, you're on the wrong side of me, man. You and I aren't getting along right away because you have actually violated that faith. But I look at it this way. My expertise is in some domain. Somebody told me this is what I do. They said, Bob, you teach by the Socratic method. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Nobody ever taught me what the Socratic method was. But the key here is, on this side of the game is what we're talking about now. Technology and self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is not just me, not how comfortable am I with technology, but what about the students in front of you? Right? The students are secondary to that as well. So the question is, can you go from no intersection to some intersection? Some overlap, somewhere where you can function, where you can combine technology, the Socratic method, what you're trying to, your comfort level, their comfort level, and the domain knowledge to shift gears, right? Okay? The second thing is the ideal, and that is, how about if we could compress all those circles into one? Think of this as the completely online course. You're engaged to the extent you need to be, right? So all of that stuff comes together. Now, most of us, we aren't nowhere near this, right? Most of us are very distant from that. And so the reality for me is, and you'll see this when I come back, is to pick things I can do to start and then try to make them bigger and bigger, right? If you try the Big Bang, which I'll talk about later, we're in trouble. So what I'd like to do is pass this over to Spring and let her talk about it. We started off with why Bob has failed, but I think Spring is too nice to criticize me in that fashion. So I think she'll probably present somewhat differently than that.
Okay, first I'll argue that Bob hasn't failed. That Bob's a little bit like Edison, who, tried 8,000 different filaments before hitting on the right one. And he will tell you himself that he's a lover of technology. The reason why he continues and persists is because he thinks there's some value to students. And I think that was illustrated in one of his previous slides. This one, right? So he says, I keep trying this because I think there is a high value to students. So the first thing I want to mention to you, let me get back over here, is that there are a variety of reasons why you might choose to use technology in your classroom. You might use it for variety, to mix things up, just to try something different. You might use it because it's trendy, right? I think there was a little bit of a undertone about that when the iPads were passed out, right? Is this about learning, or is this about doing something fun and exciting, about getting a cute toy to carry in your laptop bag? You might do it for social reasons. Sometimes, if all of our colleagues are doing something, or it's cute, if everyone else in your department is going to try the iPad, you might feel a little bit of pressure to try it too. Let's see, what else? You might get a mandate, right? So someone up top might say to you, you must try this. You must have an email account, or you must use Illuminate, or you must use courses, or you must use any number of the tools we have available to us. And I would like to suggest that you take a different approach to deciding what kinds of technology you use in your classroom. So another way, consider what it is you want to teach, what it is you're required to teach. Consider your student learning objectives. Consider whether or not there's something you'd like to add to those. Right? Most of us have a course description, have a list of objectives, and then typically we'll say to ourselves, but there's still something else I'd like my students to know. So you gather all of that together. And then you think to yourself something like, what's the best way to help students know this stuff that I want them to know? And in some cases, there will be a technology that helps students know what you want them to know. And in other cases, it is not necessary to use a technology to help students know what you want them to know. So I suggest that at any time, when you are interested in using a technology with your students, that you ask yourself the question, what's the best way to get my students to know this information? How will they know it? Not just for my test or assessment, but how will they know it as a professional? How will they know it in the future for the long term? And is there a tool that will help me to help them be able to do that? Unfortunately, and hopefully I don't get shot, but unfortunately, lecture is actually not the best teaching strategy. Lecture works for students who learn that way. And some students learn by listening. But all students don't learn by listening. Most of us can't pay attention for more than 20 minutes. And those of us who are successful listening to lectures are successful listening to lectures because we do something to distract ourselves at some point during the lecture. We either take notes, we adjust ourselves in our seat, we scratch our head or something. We do something to move at some point, or we do something to organize the information that we're hearing. And so some students have become very good at self-managing well enough to pay attention to a lecture for some amount of time. But the amount of time that human beings can listen to someone speak without doing one of those things is very short. So you as a professor have a good opportunity if you understand something about learning. You can shape those distracted moments. So you can take those times when someone needs to move, when someone needs to shift, when someone needs to stop listening to your voice and create a space where students can learn. So, another way to approach technology is to say, what technologies will help me to help students learn the content that I want them to learn? And I'll go further and say that in addition to thinking about that, consider that part of helping students learn is constantly assessing them, and it doesn't have to be formal. It can be through conversation. But you can use technology to gather data about students, to gather data about what students understand, and about whether or not they are actually learning what you intend for them to learn. So those three things: what am I teaching, how do students learn, and how can I gather information about how students learn in order to adjust my instruction? So if you find that you're giving a lecture, if you were here for the previous presentation, the law professor was talking about how he stops when he sees everyone start to hunch over or drool or something, and he uses the clicker. He asks them a question, and I'm hitting one of these. He catches them right when they are starting to fall asleep and asks them a question and makes them respond to the clicker, which makes them pay attention more or try really hard for longer, so that when he asks them the question, they're not the one person whose name comes up on the screen as the person who didn't respond or who responded incorrectly. Well, one of the things that you should be doing is thinking, okay, but how could I avoid that drooling in the first place? Can I use technology to catch the student before they want to stop paying attention? So, evaluate your course content. The second thing is evaluate your teaching style. Anthony Graziadio wrote about all the different ways professors like to teach. And the reality is all of us know that they're more complex than the 5 that he identified. Many professors consider themselves experts, and rightfully so. But the expert typically thinks that the best thing to do is to stand in front of their students for 3 hours and talk. That's not the best way to get students to learn, but students do need you to be an expert, and they do need you to share information. So being an expert is not, in and of itself, a bad thing, but it's one of the dominant styles of professors. Professors also adopt a style of facilitator. So I'm going to give you information, and then I'm going to facilitate group work. And facilitators are great as long as they don't forget to give the lecture at some point, which can happen. Right? You choose a dominant style and get stuck in it. Delegators are on an extreme of a spectrum. So professors who are delegators are professors who say, you know what, you are autonomous, you are independent, you could pretty much learn this on your own, use me as a resource. So they set the students up in groups at the beginning of the year, and then sit back and wait for the students to ask questions. Well, there's something about that that probably appeals to a particular kind of learner, but not all learners are able to be that autonomous and learn successfully. Most learners need support, scaffolding. They also need instruction. They do need your expertise. You do know more than them. So there has to be some blending of that. And most of us do blend it. So the first thing to do after you've evaluated your content is to consider, what kind of professor am I? Because it is also important, it is not just important how students learn, but it is important how you teach. And you need to know that about yourself. This is the kind of this is how I teach well. And once you know that, then you can say, okay, now that I know how I teach well, I want to augment that. So it might be that I'm an excellent lecturer, and I need to use technology to give students an opportunity to get visuals. Or I need to use technology to give students an opportunity to engage in some activity, because I don't usually do that in the classroom. So that's your next step. After you reflect on your own teaching style, think about how students learn. And I'm going to tell you something that I spent my whole doctorate learning in about 3 minutes, so I'll try to do it with some savvy. But there has been an evolution of educational theory. So behaviorism is the idea that people are shaped by external stimuli. So that if you have a student sitting in your classroom, you have a positive consequence, you can inspire them to do what you want them to do. You could also inspire them with a negative consequence. But as an educator, your job is to create stimuli that result in the desired outcome. And theorists moved away from behaviorism, but there are still lots of behaviorists around. And they moved to ideas about constructivism, about cognitivism. And I'll sit for a moment where the constructivists are. Constructivists say that learning is socially, historically, and culturally situated. That you cannot learn without interacting with other people, without understanding your space in history, and without understanding the cultural implications of your learning. That is kind of the middle of the spectrum, right? It's kind of in the middle. It's not where we are today. Kind of in the middle. Today, educators say, yeah, learning is socially, historically, and culturally situated, but data is important. And that you have to collect data about students, about learning. You have to assess students in order to understand how to teach them. And that you should be constantly collecting data and constantly adjusting instruction while also understanding how students learn. Okay, so that's a theory about how people learn. There is a theory that is important to talk about from the educator's perspective, and Howard Gardner's theory about multiple intelligences is something that you will hear teachers talk about. And if you are not an educator by profession, if you've ever studied education, I'll put it that way, then you will have heard about his work. And lots of people have reshaped it and rethought about it and put it in different frames. But what he said was that people have dominant styles of learning, just like people have dominant styles of teaching. So some people like to learn through listening. Some like to learn through logic and spatial reasoning. Some like to learn through music. Some like to learn through their bodies, through getting up and doing something with their hands. He's gone further to say that he thinks some learners explore the world through natural phenomenon, and that's the best way for them to learn. Regardless of what your list of the ways students learn are, and I'm going to show you a different list on my next slide. Regardless of the way, the ideal for teaching is that you make an attempt to teach in a way that would make sense for all of the different ways that students learn over the course of a term. And I'll skip assessment for now. And I already started talking about how student learning is complex. So let me put this one up. Okay, so learning styles and instructional approach. So I told you about Howard Gardner's theory. Howard Gardner is still out there talking. He's still talking about his theory. He'll tell you today that he thinks that the 7 or 8 multiple intelligences that he originally identified hold true and that they don't need to be added to. All theorists don't agree with him. So Felder and Solomon say that these are additional learning styles that should be considered, and then they have corresponding ideas about how professors or teachers should respond in the event that students learn in this way. So if students are active learners, you should give them an opportunity to do or try. It's sort of intuitive, right? If students are reflective learners, they should be given opportunities to think. And you can see the rest of them. Some of the ones at the bottom are important to consider. There are some students for whom, and I'm actually one of these, for whom globalism is important. They need to understand why things are relevant in order to learn. If I don't understand why, then it's difficult for me to commit to my long-term memory. There are students who are like that. So one of the things you want to consider is, can I use technology to facilitate student learning, to help students who learn in different ways access my curriculum? So for a student who needs to be active or needs to reflect, can I have students write a blog after they've listened to my lecture that will allow them to engage in reflection. That is the idea. And really, over the course of a semester, you should give students opportunities to do all of these things. Opportunities to reflect, opportunities to do something, opportunities to listen, opportunities to speak. Doing all of those things helps to make connections in the brain between the information you want a student to know and what you want them to, what you're telling them, and your input. Okay, so Bob talked about multiple learning technologies. And all of them are available to you and can be overwhelming. But if you take it one step at a time and say, which part of my syllabus can I use to facilitate students learning in the way that is most relevant to them? And the reality is, it's not ideal to assess your students every semester and say, okay, 80% of my class is a musical learner. Therefore, this semester, we're going to do lots of music to learn my content. That's not ideal. But it may be ideal to say, well, at some point in the semester, I'm going to ask students to either take the information in a different way, put it out in a different way, or demonstrate that they've learned something in a different way. And that will reach more students than other models do. I want to respond to some of what Bob talked about. Boundaries are really important. So I came prepared to talk to you about educational theory, but I haven't talked to you about what it is that I teach and do at the GSEP. So I teach two different courses. I teach math and science methods for the elementary classroom. So I teach teachers how to teach math and science. And I also teach a class called Faith, Ethics, Diversity, and Philanthropy in Social Entrepreneurship and Change, which is a hybrid program. So I use technology to teach a very, what's the best way to say it? Subjective, maybe? That might be not be the best word, but a very theoretical, right? A very theoretical course. And then in another course, I actually have to teach my students to use technology to teach their own students. Now, some of the challenges that I have, I've had some of the challenges that Bob has. Boundaries are huge. I tell my students, I respond to email in one business day. So if you email me on Friday at 4:30, don't expect a response until Monday sometime before the end of the day. They seem to respond well to that. And one of the things that I wanted them to understand was that I want to get back to you quickly. I just also would like to have Sunday to myself. I did make the mistake that Bob made too, giving students my cell phone number. That's a bad mistake. Some of you might do it. It hasn't worked well for me. I had a student who called me every Sunday at 8 to talk about his upcoming teaching week. You know, I'm really scared. I gave the students a test on Friday. I answered the phone about twice, and then I put his name in my phone so I would know not to answer. So boundaries are really important. I was talking with Alan Reagan. I don't see him, but he's probably around here somewhere. I was talking with Alan Reagan about Illuminate, which is a wonderful tool, and I use it every other week with students. But one of the boundaries that I have to set is to turn off certain tools. Because I have had only one group of students, not all of them. I've taught several sections, but one section that for some reason thought it was really fun to write on my PowerPoint during my Illuminate presentation. So since that happened, I start class by saying, you know, in a setting like this, you wouldn't stand up and start drawing flowers and hearts on the whiteboard, right? So when we are in the Illuminate space, you don't write on my whiteboard. And Alan has since taught me how to turn that tool off, and that is a very good thing. So boundaries are huge and important, and I don't want to not let Bob finish up, so I'm going to go quickly and just say that for those of you with limited experience, choose one part of your course and one tool and give it a try. For those of you who are more advanced users or who have already tried something, consider using technology to assess students or yourself, so to engage in either self-assessment or student assessment. Consider using technology just to monitor progress over the course of the semester. get support when you need it. I don't know about Bob, but I use technology, and I love it, and I have fun with it, and my students think I know what I'm doing, and I know a lot. But I could not be successful if I weren't calling technology whenever I hit a bump in the road. I would probably turn around. I would say, okay, I'm not going to use that tool. But instead of saying I'm not going to use that tool, I usually just call Alan or John or Rami. There's a few of them. And because they open their door and say, oh, yeah, I wanted to know. I haven't seen anybody have this problem before. We're so excited to help you with it. If their response wasn't that, I would probably stop using some of the tools that I use. But I don't, because I have good support for it. So try something new, and know that I'm happy to talk with you about the challenges as well, because they exist. And it's important to acknowledge that. I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so the reason this isn't a real top 10 best practices list is because it's going to change tomorrow. And it'll probably change again 3 weeks from now, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to talk about a few things, and one of them has to do with the concept of the digital native hype. If I hear one more person tell me, oh, you got to go where they are, you got to do what they do, that's how you're going to connect with your student. I'm going to ask them if they've ever seen a student that sat and played with Excel all day long, right? And if they did, I hope they're not in front of me, because they're scary people, right? So, I mean, the point is yes, they have some skills. They're very specific, right? They know what they know, and they wonder how come you don't use it, but they don't know what they don't know, just like in content. And I think one of the challenges we get into is we're always trying to meet them 3/4 of the way rather than think about bringing them more toward the appropriate technologies for the appropriate content and what have you. The weakest link, inevitably in my classroom, is somebody who walks in and says, I'm not very computer literate. Now remember, I teach IS and Quant, and I do it all on laptops. I'm not very computer literate, so everybody told me to go buy a Mac. Now, if you walk into me, I refer to them as stinking Macs, right? And I say to my classes, who in here, go ahead and show me, who in here is a stinking Mac user? Okay? I hate all of you. Technically, I hate Microsoft, because here's what Microsoft did. They said, hey, we have a Mac for Office, and when it runs macros, it runs certain kinds of macros. And we have a Mac for PCs, and now it runs a different. This was a recent decision. This was like a 2007, I think, or the 2010 decision. So none of the macros or programs that I use in my class run on a Mac. So I have to take a person who says, I didn't know how to use a computer, everybody told me to buy a Mac, and I have to tell them, oh, it's very simple. Load up Boot Camp, a virtual machine, MS 2010, which, by the way, you can buy all this stuff from, for $100 from the school. It's terrific. And then you'll be okay. What have I just now done to that person? Right? They think I'm crazy, which is marginally true. But I can't help them beyond that, because that puts me in the technical support area. Another problem. Wikipedia is, as many of you probably know by now, is like an encyclopedia. For some reason, our students will come in and I'll get a paper written in a master's level class with citations to Wikipedia. So I just blatantly say up front, guess what, guys? Wikipedia doesn't always have the right answer, and frankly, it's no better than an encyclopedia. And by the way, Google, you have to look past the first page of your 27,000 results. I'm amazed at the challenge we get into. This concept of the digital native suggests that, yes, they're good with cell phones, they're good with small screens, they have a certain inclination toward technology. My problem is they have never tried to connect it to learning, and that's your role, is to connect it to learning. All right? Next one. Technology will fail. And it won't fail at the it's not like you have a flat tire in your garage after you got home from going out to dinner, right? When did you have the flat tire? On your way to wherever you were going. Well, that's the way technology is. Just when you think you've introduced something that's going to work, you better have a backup plan. Sometimes I have successful backup plans. Sometimes they're as bad as the original one, and most of the time I have to, kind of come up with a solution on the fly. The point is that if you're thinking about this is going to work and here's how it's going to work, I guarantee you're going to have a situation where it fails. Example, in my classroom on a Saturday, we didn't happen to have technology support academic computing on this day, and sure enough, 2 of my students couldn't access the wireless. And I had created a whole thing of download this, fill it out, upload that, go here, do this, right? So now these 2 students are just sitting there watching, and now they got to do it outside of class later on. So I can already see 2 1s headed on my evaluation, right? Because, by the way, I still didn't fix their problem. I told them they should contact academic computing and see what happens, right? All right, IT help number. If you don't have this number memorized, on my syllabus it says Bob McQuaid office number and IT help desk number. And I explain to them when to call one and when to call the other. I'm a content expert. They're a solution expert. In fact, if they have a problem, if they try to load up something to Sakai or courses and it doesn't work, they don't get to call me first. They have to call the IT help desk. They have to take a screenshot of the problem, and then and only then can they send me an email that has the trouble ticket, the attachment, which I told you I never accept, and so I know they've got an incident report. Now, I had an interesting experience. I promised Jerry I wouldn't tell this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell the story anyways. And Jerry blamed me later on, so we're kind of even at this point. I teach a class that bridges semesters, and they had just done an update of courses, right? So I'm doing an Illuminate help session. I got 15 people online. We're cooking. There's like 5 or 6 who can't get hooked up. So they're doing exactly what I told them to do. They're calling help desk and trying to get hooked up and all set. And I get off the help session, which I had recorded, thankfully. And so the backup plan was, hey, good news, we have it recorded. But by the way, if you can't get in, it doesn't matter, right? So then I called the help desk to find out what was going on. And they said we're aware of the problem, and a couple of the students have called, et cetera, et cetera. 5 minutes later, I got an email, and what I tell you the line said, it said, resolved. Incident resolved. I thought, oh, great. So I tried to log into courses, and I couldn't get into courses. So me being who I am, I immediately sent an email, let's see, to Alan, I think maybe Tom, and anybody that I knew with an IT in their title, you know, even if it was just in the spelling of their name, they're going to get an email from me, right? Said, all right, this incident is not resolved. I got 20 students I don't know what to do with. And also on the incident reports, you can click a little link that says, if you're not satisfied, please respond back. So I responded back. I said, I'm not satisfied. It's not resolved. So they sent me another email, and they said, oh, longer sentence. It has been elevated to the next level, and the next level informed us that they are aware of the problem, so therefore do not accept any more calls. Of course, now I'm thinking Tim Chester, right? I'm higher level, because my guys, the guys that I count on every day that always help me, let me down, because in that 4 minutes, in that interim, they weren't responsive to me, right, on a Thursday night or something like that, whatever it was. I didn't copy Tim, but I sent the same email out to everybody, and they could get the sense of my level of exasperation, to be polite. So Jerry calls me the next day, and he says, you know you broke the system, right? This was your fault. Now, again, you have to remember, he and I go a little ways back, so I understood he was just pulling my cord. But the funny thing was we had broken the system. The upgrade wasn't going to handle more than, I think, 10 combination. So actually, he called to thank me, which made me feel very good about myself for helping IT solve this problem. But the reality is, think about that. I mean, it happened between semesters. We were actually very lucky that it just happened to this one. In fact, he called me and says, Bob, who else is teaching? How much trouble am I in here? And I said, well, you're not in any trouble. I'm the only idiot that teaches over semester breaks, right? So that's the challenge, is what happens when it fails? What are you going to do? Do not, under any circumstances, become the IT help desk. Unfortunately, I'm an IS professor, so guess what? They actually think I work in IT. I try to dissuade them of that as much as I can, but I can't help it. So all I'm saying is, really, don't do it. And in fact, we're lucky in the business school, because we've got a couple of, we've got Linda and Susan mostly, but several others as well. You guys have it in your schools too. You have this support. We hire these really kind of nutty people. I've sent an email on a Friday night, and like Linda or Susan will email me back, oh, here's your solution. Well, I'm getting offline now. I'll get back on in the morning and figure it out, right? All right, start small and build up. I'm going to come back to that one. Implement one great idea at a time. This is the low-hanging fruit, okay? Go after the low-hanging fruit. Pick something small in your class. The worst mistake you can make is think about my little model that says if everything comes together, you get a nice big green circle. Well, I have never had everything come together. And in fact, I've picked up so much fruit off the ground. I mean, my fruit isn't even hanging anymore. I'm just looking for any way to help solve my minimal, insignificant problems, right? And I think there's a time to move forward. One of our groups, the Masters in Organizational Development, an outstanding program, has decided to put a rather significant online component to it. And it's been interesting to listen to these applied behavior and org theory professors talk to us about all the challenges they've been having. You know, they just want to do a voice thread. What's voice thread? It's a bunch of slides online with an audio that you can record. You can sit there with the slide there and you record the audio. Well, how many tries do you think it is to get a really good audio for that one slide? More than once, right? They're telling me they're up till 2 or 3 in the morning. And by the way, what sounds good at 3 in the morning, when you listen to it the next day, you'd be shocked at how the things you've said, okay? And so what's interesting is when you start to think about these things, try an in-class exercise first. That way you see the experience that all the students are having. You see every error, you see every problem. You know, the challenge is pretty straightforward to deal with. And then I always set a low grade value, less than 10%. The first time I use a technology, it's worth about 10%. If the student accidentally does something right, they get a 9.5 or a 10. If they just completely mess it up, they get an 8.5. If I completely mess it up, everybody gets a 10, and I'm not giving all A's because it's only worth 10%, right? So really start small, even on the grading side of it. I always reward problem solvers as well. You know, there's a few students in our class that actually are, if they weren't digital natives, they moved there as quickly as they could. They're sharp folks, they understand things. They'll be the first ones to email you and say, I have this problem, here's what you need to do to fix it. I don't give extra credit, but those guys, I'm like thanking them, and kind of like if they get close, I'll give them the next grade up, so to speak, right? And then be very specific about the grade rubric. When you do something using technology versus in your class, you need to have a rubric that really includes the fact that you're using a technology-based system, right? The more the merrier. Get some help. You're not the only subject matter expert in your field. Get some other folks to talk to you about what would they include in this. Better yet, think 2 or 3 people making a 30-minute presentation rather than you trying to make an hour and 15-minute asynchronous presentation, right? Much better quality. Find somebody that mentors you, preferably somebody who's done it before, right? Somebody who maybe even recently, boy, I tried that and here's all the problems I had, okay? Try to be aggressive on that because that's very helpful to have somebody help you step through. Again, we're kind of blessed at our school, and again, do the other schools have similar support besides you guys, or are you it? You're kind of the game? Everybody, okay. Okay. The other thing I've started doing with Zentation, as I mentioned earlier, is let the students develop the technology as part of the learning experience. That's turned into somewhat valuable again because they get into it then, and it becomes a good part of the system. Okay. One of my favorites is this concept of convenience versus value, right? Efficiency versus effectiveness, right? Does easier equate to improved? Have we improved the experience of the student by making it easier for them? What about the quality of the student experience versus the quality of the faculty experience? A lot of my colleagues like to give case readings and then they have discussion board questions. And those discussion board questions are great except for one small problem. I hate to read. I know, what, a professor that hates to read? I don't even like to read for pure enjoyment. If I can avoid reading, I do it, okay? So you can imagine when someone says, you know what you need, Bob? You need to put in discussion boards. I don't need discussion boards. They're not going to make me a happy camper. In fact, I'm going to resent every moment that I'm grading that experience, right? So the question is, are you replacing or adding to in-class content? And this is something that Spring addressed a little bit, is are you taking something you would normally do in class that takes up that valuable contact time, and are you taking that out of your classroom, meaning you got more valuable contact time to do something else? Or are you actually doing something in parallel? For me, I like to do screen captures of working homework problems. Because what I've learned is if I give a solution, a blank spreadsheet, a student a blank spreadsheet and a solution, they see the answer and they can recreate it. But if I give them just a blank spreadsheet on the next problem, they can't recreate it because it's a logic flow. It's not getting to the answer, right? So those screen captures of me solving problems have been pretty valuable. Now again, I hate to listen to them. I tell them right before you go to sleep is a good time to watch this because you'll be asleep in like 7 minutes. Okay? But I would encourage you to do that. Okay? Are you going to try a big bang rollout or are you going to do a repetitive exercise? We use courses pretty repetitively. Most of us use them. They're used to it, that kind of stuff. In my case, I've put Zentation in the classroom. I have to structure, I have to scaffold the process of them using it. Because if I just said, go use Zentation and in 2 weeks bring me back an online presentation, that'd be a 2-point deduction in student evaluations, right? Skip 1, we'll just go straight to bad, okay? So if you're going to do big bang, you're taking a lot of risk. Don't do it without really thinking through the impact. But on the other hand, if you're doing some small stuff and can pick pieces and move it out, then you're actually in pretty good shape. All right, don't fix what ain't broke, right? In my case, I try not to take things out of the class that I like to do. Because frankly, that's why I do what I do, right? I enjoy the lecture aspect of class. The reality of it is I can deliver some content offline, but I still like the interactive lecture. I guess that's what's called the Socratic method, right? Replace things that you do repetitively. Homework for me, going over homework problems, nothing's worse. I've gone over these homework problems 100 times. I hate doing it. Make a video capture of it for me, let them watch it. They can watch it 5 times. They're going to get something out of it. I don't have to do that in my class. It's extremely valuable. Right? Find what they don't like and try to figure out a technology solution to it. I haven't been successful on that one yet. I just found that one online. Okay? I'm pretty sure I've found the things they do like, and I have found a technology failure to make it not work, but the other I haven't. Okay? Use the right technology. All right, how many of you have read Moby Dick? How many words are in it? 212,000. I only know because I looked it up. I've only read about 40,000, and then I got the Cliff's Notes. I'm not much of a reader, as I mentioned. Right? So 212,000 words. If you were to tweet that to them, it would take 6,600 tweets. Is that a good way to read Moby Dick? I'm going to tweet Moby Dick to you. Call me Ishmael. Tweet. Right? That's, by the way, it's most of all I've read. I don't know. I really don't know the second line. So use the right technology. There's collaborative technologies. For me, Skype is great for one-on-one. It's quick. They call in. They share their screen. No problem. It would not work at all for a help session because I can only share one screen with one person. Illuminate works spectacularly. I can record it so those people who aren't on it, they can watch it later. The people who were on it can watch it again and again. Right? One challenge, did you know some people don't know how to make their microphone work with their computer? Or worse yet, so what happens is they sit there with their microphone on their computer on, and then it's going right into the speakers, and what do you hear on the other side? Yeah, you get, right, all the feedback. And it doesn't matter how many times you've told them not to do that. Then they'll go sit in Starbucks, which is wonderful, because you hear the orders and the shh and all that stuff, you know. Right? Sometimes you have to actually tell them how to utilize the technology effectively. And then remember, if their microphone doesn't work, who do they call? Not you. That's the other number that you give them, right? Not you. All right. Everyone else is doing it. Now, I want some of you to understand, I pulled this off of the Chronicle of Higher Education. They did a study, 4,600 professors, and you'll notice 70-some% of us use course management. What a surprise, right? We've all bought into Blackboard since the 80s and courses recently, or Sakai recently. But notice some of the other, this is the dark blue is never use it. Plagiarism detection, 70%. Collaborative editing software, almost 80%. Blogs, 84%. Student response systems such as clickers, 80%. These are the not users. Video conferencing, etc., right? Not users. So don't feel bad if you're thinking I'm kind of a neophyte, because frankly, you're in the broader sense of the word where everybody else is. 5 years from now, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if these numbers change or if they remember to do the study again. By then, the technologies will change, right? Instead of using clickers, we will be using cell phones. Instead of saying turn off your cell phones or your smartphones, we'll say load up the smart app and let's go, right? All right. Technology doesn't change. This is a fallacy. I don't know if you guys have seen this. These two are playing Pong. You remember Pong? Okay. This picture I just got because it's actually, this guy's growing hair while he's watching television. I don't know if you fly much, but I've been fascinated by this potential $500 device so I can grow hair. But it just looked like a technology innovation of some kind, you know. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but I'm this close, okay? One more picture that doesn't include hair, and I might go that route. The point is the challenge we have is that technology is changing. iPads, what year did iPads come out? 08? 09? What's the next technology? Right? What's the next? Remember when tablets came out and tablets were going to change the world, which was just a computer that you could flip around and a laptop? And most of us, some of us have them. Most of them use them marginally as laptops, but very little as tablets. Right? A tablet has the same capability as a iPad, right? And me being on the president of the Stinkin' Mac Club, I would prefer to use a tablet, right? But I don't use the capability. 5 years from now, things are going to change. All right. I would usually say Q&A at this point. We've gone a little bit long. We started a few minutes late. My suspicion is you guys don't agree with me anyways. So if you want to go ahead and argue, let's have at it. We can have at it at lunch, by the way. I'm going to turn the floor over to Jerry, and thanks for listening.